On the morning of April 14, 1994, Stage 9 at Universal Studios Hollywood was running 47 minutes behind schedule. The crew had been on the lot since 5:45 in the morning. The catering table was half cleared. The lighting rigs were still being adjusted for the final take of a blocking rehearsal that had already been reset 3 times. There were 61 people on that stage floor. Grips, camera operators, a dialect coach who had not spoken in 2 hours, a second unit director seated on an apple box with a clipboard he had stopped reading. Outside the stage doors, the temperature was 71 degrees. Inside, with the lights running, it was closer to 88. Nobody was comfortable. Nobody was entirely paying attention. Jean-Claude Van Damme was 28 years old that morning. He stood 6 feet even in his training shoes. He weighed 193 pounds, distributed across a frame that had spent 14 years in competitive full-contact karate and kickboxing before Hollywood found him. He had a 18-match kickboxing record, with 16 wins, 11 of them by knockout. He had studied Shotokan karate from the age of 10 under Claude Goetz in Brussels, then added ballet training for 2 years at age 16, which gave his technique an extension and a height that pure combat sports training rarely produced. He had won the European Professional Karate Association middleweight title before he was 21 years old. By April 1994, he had completed 6 major studio films. He had a bodyguard on set that morning. He had a personal trainer. He had opinions. In the next 29 seconds, with 4 adjustments of weight and 1 controlled movement, everything on that stage would come to a complete stop. Not a single person in that building. Not the script supervisor. Not the stunt coordinator, with 22 years of production experience. Not the dialect coach. Not the second unit director on the apple box. Not any one of the 61 people present understood what they were watching until it was already over. They would spend the next 30 years trying to explain what they had seen to people who had not been there. He had been on the lot since 6 in the morning. Not for the film. Not for a meeting. He had come because the stunt coordinator had called him 2 weeks earlier and asked if he had time. He had said he had time. He drove himself. He wore a white t-shirt that had been washed so many times the collar had begun to curl, a pair of dark canvas trousers, and flat leather shoes with no grip on the sole. He carried nothing. He signed in at the gate with a first name only and walked across the lot with his hands in his pockets, alone, moving at the pace of a man who has nowhere to be and considers that a form of wealth. Chuck Norris was 53 years old that morning. He had been out of competitive fighting for 17 years by then. He had won the Professional Middleweight Karate World Championship in 1968 and defended it 5 consecutive times before retiring undefeated. He had founded his own martial art, Chang Kuk Do, which by 1994 had thousands of practitioners across the country. He had served in the United States Air Force. He had trained Steve McQueen and trained alongside Bruce Lee. He had been in the ring, on the mat, and on the street in circumstances that never made it into interviews. He had been acting for 21 years. He was not, that morning, doing any of those things. He was standing at the edge of the catering table pouring coffee into a paper cup. And nobody on Stage 9 had looked at him twice. The conversation began, as most of them do, as a demonstration. Van Damme had been working through a technical disagreement with the stunt coordinator about the mechanics of a sequence, specifically the alignment of a turning heel kick in relation to a camera that was positioned lower than standard at roughly 22 inches from the floor. The kick as designed required a pivot of approximately 200 degrees to land within the frame. Van Damme's position was that the technique was wrong, not logistically wrong, technically wrong. He demonstrated the turn 3 times. The 3rd time, he spoke with the flat certainty of someone who had never been corrected on the subject. He said that a heel kick thrown above the center line at that angle was theater, not fighting. He said that anyone who told you otherwise had learned fighting from a movie, not from a dojo. He said this to a room of 60 people. He said it loudly enough that the grip adjusting the overhead rig on the far side of the stage stopped what he was doing. The stunt coordinator did not answer. He looked across the stage. Van Damme followed the look. The man by the catering table had not moved. He was holding his paper cup in both hands, the way a man holds a cup when the coffee is still too hot to drink. He was looking at the middle distance between himself and the far wall, at nothing in particular. He had heard everything. There was no indication that hearing it had changed anything about his morning. Van Damme said, "Tell me that man disagrees with me." The stunt coordinator said, "Why don't you ask him?" What happened over the next 4 minutes before the 29 seconds has been told in different ways by a number of the 61 people who were present. Some details have accumulated that were not there originally. Some details have been shed that belong to the record. What is consistent across every version? From the grip who retired to Flagstaff to the second unit director who went on to shoot 3 more decades of studio films, is the sequence. The sequence does not change. Van Damme crossed the stage floor. He walked with the unhurried authority of a man accustomed to rooms rearranging around him. He stopped at a distance of approximately 11 feet. He introduced himself by his first name, which was unnecessary. He said he had seen a number of the older man's films. He said he had appreciated the action design. He said it with the specific warmth of a man distributing a category of compliment he had organized in advance. Then he said, "But technique on film and technique in contact are not the same animal, are they?" He said it's a statement. He said the words are not with an emphasis that carried the specific weight of a man who was certain the answer was no. The man by the catering table took a sip of coffee. He did not lower the cup fully before he answered. He said, "They are not." Van Damme said he believed there was a generation of American martial artists who had built their reputations inside the film industry, rather than inside a competitive structure. He said this was not a criticism. He said it the way men say things are not criticisms when they are. He said that the specific techniques being used in the production they were both standing in were beautiful techniques but not fighting techniques. He said beautiful with a particular precision that positioned it opposite the word useful. He said he had no doubt the older gentleman could still move. But, he said, he let the word sit for a moment with nothing after it. Then he said, "I would be interested to know how the older model of American karate performs against contemporary full contact training." He said it clinically. He said it at a volume that carried to the overhead rig. The room had gone the specific quiet of a working film set, when the floor of what is happening drops away entirely. The man by the catering table set his paper cup down on the table behind him. He did not look at the cup when he set it down. He found the surface without looking. He removed his jacket. It was a dark denim jacket, faded at both elbows. He folded it once along the center seam. He set it on the table next to the cup. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not stretch. He did not shift his weight. He stood at the same height he had stood at the catering table, which was not particularly impressive. He looked at Jean-Claude Van Damme for the first time, with the focused, diagnostic attention of someone who had already completed the relevant assessment and was now simply confirming the result. He said, "All right." He had already lost. He simply did not know it yet. If you want to know what happened in the next 29 seconds, make sure you are subscribed and leave a comment below, telling us where in the world you are watching from. The next 29 seconds took 30 years to piece together, from the people who were standing close enough to see it, and far enough back to survive the memory intact. They moved to an open area of the stage floor, approximately 40 feet from the camera rigs, 22 feet from the nearest wall. The second unit director had not moved from his apple box. The stunt coordinator had moved to a position near the center of the room where he could see both men without turning his head. 4 crew members backed against the wall without speaking. 3 of them independently recalled later that they had stopped breathing before anything had happened. The dialect coach, a woman of 44 years, with 2 decades of work across 31 productions, said later that what she remembered most was not the movement but the silence that preceded it, which she described as the most organized silence she had encountered on any set in her professional life. Van Damme took a position at a distance of approximately 9 feet. He did not rush to close that distance. He was a patient fighter. 14 years of competition had taught him to read the opening, not to manufacture one. He was watching the older man's feet. He was watching the older man's hands. He was watching the plane of the shoulders. He was not watching the eyes. He should have been watching the eyes. Second 1. Van Damme shifted his weight fractionally to his left, the specific preparatory adjustment that precedes a right side entry. It was a trained movement practiced across thousands of rounds. It was barely visible. The older man registered it without reacting to it. He did not shift. He did not telegraph a counter. He simply noted it the way a reader notes a word without stopping the sentence. Second 2. Van Damme completed the weight transfer and began a cross-step entry, closing the distance from 9 feet to approximately 6 feet in a single movement. It was clean. It was fast. The stunt coordinator later said it was one of the more economical entries he had seen in 22 years of watching trained fighters move. At 6 feet, Van Damme launched the first technique, a left jab targeted at the central line, designed not to land but to establish the older man's response pattern. The jab did not land. It did not need to yet. But it did not land the way a punch does not land when a man slips it. It landed in empty space that had not been empty 1/10 of a second earlier. A fight is not two men hitting each other. A fight is a conversation about distance and about who controls the terms of that conversation. There are fighters who win by dominating distance, pressing it, collapsing it, removing the opponent's ability to generate power by making the space between them too small for anything meaningful to happen. And there are fighters who win by understanding distance in a more fundamental sense, by understanding that the most dangerous position is not closest to your opponent, but exactly as close as you chose to be. And no closer. Chuck Norris had been studying that second form of distance management since 1958. By 1994 it had become something below conscious calculation. The 9 feet had not been a coincidence. Second 5. Van Damme reset at 7 feet and reassessed. The stunt coordinator said he saw something shift in Van Damme's expression at this moment. Not fear, not hesitation, but the specific recalibration of a very good fighter who has encountered a variable he did not account for in his preparation. Van Damme was fast. He had always been fast. He was discovering, at second 5 of the 29 seconds, that the man across from him was somehow already somewhere else before Van Damme had decided to go there. Second 8. The second technique. Van Damme committed to a turning heel kick, the same technique he had been demonstrating to the stunt coordinator 40 minutes earlier, thrown at approximately 70% power toward the older man's left temple. It was, the stunt coordinator said, a genuinely excellent technique. The extension was full, the rotation was clean, the chamber was correct. If it had landed, it would have ended the morning differently. It did not land. The older man moved 14 inches to his right, not backward, laterally, at an angle that took him entirely out of the kick's arc while simultaneously placing him closer to Van Damme rather than farther, which is the opposite of what the instinct of most trained fighters produces in response to a committed kick. He was inside the kick before it finished. He was 18 inches from Van Damme's face when the kick completed its rotation and found nothing. Second 11. The stunt coordinator had both hands flat on the table next to him. He was not aware of having placed them there. The grip on the overhead rig had descended the ladder at some point and was standing on the stage floor. The second unit director had set his clipboard down on the apple box beside him. Nobody was speaking. The dialect coach said later that she remembered the specific sound of the ventilation system above the stage ceiling, because it was the only sound in the building. Second 13. Van Damme's third entry. He was committed now in the way that very skilled fighters become committed when they have not been touched and cannot fully account for why. It is a pride that masquerades as aggression, and it produces the opening that patience has been waiting for. He came straight, a combination, left body right head, thrown with full intention. The body shot landed on a forearm, not blocked, not parried. It landed on a forearm that had been placed there at a precise angle that redirected the force along the line of the arm and away from the body behind it. The headshot did not land. It passed above a head that had dipped 3 inches at the precise moment the combination reached its terminal point. Van Damme was at second 14. Moving through the completion of a combination that had spent itself entirely without result, at a distance of 16 inches from a man who had not raised his voice, had not raised a sweat, and had not thrown a single technique in return. Second 16. One movement. The older man's right hand came from a position below his own hip. Not drawn back, not telegraphed. Rising from below the sight line at an angle that directed it toward the specific point below Van Damme's left cheekbone where the masseter muscle meets the jaw. It did not travel the full distance. It stopped. It stopped at a measured distance of 1 inch from the surface it had targeted. 1 inch. It stopped there and it stayed there, the fist held at extension, perfectly still. At a distance that did not permit Van Damme to move without the movement completing itself. For 4 seconds, nobody in the building moved. The ventilation system continued above the ceiling. Outside the stage, a forklift was moving a loaded pallet across the service road toward the prop warehouse. Traffic on Universal Studios Boulevard was moving at its ordinary pace. A delivery had arrived at the east entrance and was being processed at the gate. The world outside Stage 9 was not interested in what was happening inside Stage 9. It did not need to be. What was happening inside Stage 9 was complete within itself. The older man lowered his hand. He did not step back. He extended it, the same hand, palm upward, open at a level between them. An open hand in a fighting context is a specific communication. It is not an offer of comfort. It is a statement about who has finished and who has been finished. Van Damme looked at the hand for a moment. He looked at the man. The man's face had not changed its expression since he set down his coffee cup. His breathing was the same. His posture was the same. He was waiting, without impatience, for Van Damme to understand. Van Damme looked at the hand for 3 more seconds. Then he took it. The older man leaned forward slightly. He said 4 words to Van Damme at a distance and a volume that reached no one else in the building. 4 words. The stunt coordinator, who was standing 8 feet away at the time, has never been able to confirm what the words were. The second unit director said he believed he saw the final word on the older man's lips but would not commit to the full sentence. What every account agrees on is what happened after the 4 words. Van Damme nodded once. A small nod. A particular kind of nod. The kind that does not accompany agreement with a fact but rather with an assessment. He looked at the floor for a moment. He looked up. He said, "I understand." He said it quietly. He said it the way a man says something when the saying of it is the thing, not the audience for it. He did not make an excuse. That is worth saying plainly. He did not reach for a reason. He did not suggest the footing was wrong or the lighting was difficult or that he had been demonstrating technique for 40 minutes and was not fresh. He did not explain. He stood in what had happened without trying to reduce it and he said, "I understand." The stunt coordinator said later that this was the moment he remembered most. Not the 29 seconds. Not the stopped fist. The moment when a man who had been genuinely, seriously, publicly wrong about something stood in that fact without flinching and gave it its correct name. The grip on the stage floor began moving again. 2 crew members resumed a conversation they had been in the middle of. The second unit director picked up his clipboard. The dialect coach walked back to her position near the script table. It happened gradually, the room returning to itself, the way a room does when the thing that arrested it has been resolved and ordinary time is permitted to resume. The older man collected his jacket from the catering table. He folded it over his forearm. He picked up his coffee. He drank from it and set it back. He looked at no one in particular on his way to the exit. The stunt coordinator moved to intercept him near the stage door. He placed one hand on the older man's right shoulder briefly, with the specific weight of a man confirming something he is not certain of through touch rather than language. The older man said, "Good morning." He walked through the stage door and into the April light. He did not tell anyone. Not the stunt coordinator, not the producer who called him that afternoon about an unrelated project, not in interviews over the following years. The stunt coordinator told it first, in 2007 to a journalist working on a retrospective piece about action cinema, who had been asking general questions about Chuck Norris's reputation among professionals. The journalist included it as a single paragraph. 11 people who had been on Stage 9 in April 1994 reached out to the journalist within the following 2 weeks. Each of them had a version. Each version was consistent in structure. The specific numbers had drifted slightly, the way numbers do across 13 years. One version had the distance at 7 feet. Another had 70 people on the floor instead of 61. One account gave the kick sequence a different order, but the essential record held. Van Damme spoke about it himself in 2011, in an interview for a martial arts publication in France that was translated and reprinted in an American trade magazine. He said it was one of 2 or 3 experiences in his professional life that had revised his understanding of what he actually knew. He said he had walked onto that stage with a model of the martial arts world that had been accurate enough to succeed within. He said the older man had shown him, in 29 seconds, that the model was missing a variable he had not thought to account for. He did not say what the variable was. He said the 4 words, but he said them in French. And the translator's note indicated that they did not carry across directly. The closest approximation he offered was, "Be less certain of your ceiling." He said he had thought about those words in the intervening 17 years more times than he could calculate. He said the experience made him a better filmmaker. He said it made him a more careful teacher. He said it made him more patient with people who were confident and wrong, because he had been that man, and a stranger in a faded denim jacket had treated him with more dignity and defeat than he had earned with his performance before it. The stunt coordinator retired from the industry in 2019. In the interview given for his retirement profile in a production trade publication, he was asked what moment in his 22 years on set had stayed with him most clearly. He said Stage 9, April 1994, without hesitation. He said he had seen thousands of hours of trained fighters in training and in performance across his career. He said he had never seen anything before or since that communicated the distance between performance and reality in a manner that was so quiet, and so complete, and so ungrudging in the way it was delivered. He said the older man had not been trying to prove anything. That was the thing. A man trying to prove something moves differently than a man who has nothing to prove. The bodies read differently from across a room, he said. He had spent 22 years learning to read bodies. He knew the difference. The lesson of Stage 9 is not about fighting. It is not about age against youth, or American martial arts against European full-contact training, or any of the categories in which people have attempted to organize what happened in 29 seconds on a film lot in April of 1994. The lesson is this: the story a man tells about another man's ceiling is a story about his own. The man who arrived on that stage with certainty about what an older American karateka could and could not do in contact was not wrong because he was arrogant. He was wrong because he had not looked carefully enough. Certainty is the specific failure of attention. It closes the eye before the evidence is in. Van Damme was honest enough, when the evidence arrived, to open the eye again. That is the part of this story that matters past the 29 seconds. That is what the 4 words were about. A man who can be corrected is not diminished by the correction, he is enlarged by it. The enlargement is available to everyone. Most people refuse it because the moment it is offered looks, from the outside, exactly like defeat. Next week, we will be looking at how Chuck Norris walked into a closed-door session with Bruce Lee in 1971, and what the 2 men said to each other when the room was empty that rewrote the terms of what American martial arts was permitted to become. If you have not already subscribed, do that now. Leave a comment below with where you are watching from. Wherever you are, you already know the name. Next week you will understand it differently.